While I wouldn't describe myself as a metalhead because I enjoy several musical genres, I am a gigantic fan of heavily distorted guitars, aggressive drums, driving bass lines, and vocals which jump between melodic singing and screaming. Video games and metal have been connected in my mind for decades. When I was learning to play guitar was also around the time I got my first computer. It was 1994, I was 10 years old, the first episode of Doom could be had for $5 at your local gas station, and Tool had just released Anima. Fighting my way through Phobos base to the tune of 46 and 2 was a transcendent experience and was almost as responsible for making me a man as the first time I saw Tia Carrere in Wayne's World. While there certainly has been no shortage of games inspired by Doom on this channel, each with their own incredible metal soundtracks, in October 2019 I played a game called Valfaris. I absolutely love using this term as an adjective, so I'm happy to say that Valfaris is one of the most metal games I have ever played. Valfaris is a level-based side-scrolling shooter developed by Steel Mantis Games and published by Big Sugar. No relation to the blues rock band from my hometown, Toronto. Though they're pretty good too. Valfaris takes the intense shooting of games like Contra and Metal Slug and throws in an aesthetic which looks like a cross between an Iron Maiden album cover and Warhammer 40k. Unlike the incredible 2017 shooter Cuphead, which is more of a straight-up homage to the aforementioned games, Valfaris adds in some light exploration and RPG elements. You, as a man named Therion, with the aid of your AI companion, Hecate, Cortana, murder your way through Valfaris, your family home. This home happens to be a space station, which contains an ecosystem which is orbiting a dying star and your father Vral has doomed it to destruction. So not exactly home with the family for Canadian Thanksgiving. Though that is where I played most of this game.
That's my Xbox controller.
Oh.
The story concept is pretty wild and there's a fair amount of text-only dialogue, but it never really gets in the way of the intense gameplay. There's a bit of dialogue at the beginning of each level, a bit of dialogue when you encounter a new mechanic or a boss, and a bit of dialogue at the end of each level. It rarely goes longer than a few lines back and forth between Therion and Hecate, or between either of them and one of the villains. I streamed the vast majority of my playthrough, and I actually got a kick out of voice acting the dialogue text. At first I was just reading it aloud to keep the viewers involved, but it became a fun game to come up with new voices for characters on the fly, and Therion let me flex my Solid Snake impression. You're my boy, David Hayter.
Vral vanished, he left us to our fate. His greed damned us all. My father's dishonor knows no bounds.
While the storyline is only marginally more complicated than Contra 3's, there are aliens. Kill them all.
I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say kill them all!
Yeah! Oh yeah! Yeah! Oh yeah!
The gameplay has much more depth to it, and it's all mediated by a risk-reward progression system. As you progress through each level, you will find checkpoints which not only save your progress, but refill your health and weapon energy. These checkpoints require you to use an item known as a resurrection idol, and there is often only one to acquire between checkpoints. If you choose to not activate a checkpoint, you can stockpile resurrection idols and at the end of a level trade in your surplus for blood metal, which is the primary upgrade material. So if you find you've made it through an area without much difficulty, you can make yourself more powerful later on by foregoing the checkpoint. However, you may find that the next area is extremely difficult. Luckily, the after-death reset time is extremely short, so even if you do have to repeat an area over and over again, it never becomes very frustrating. Similar to Hotline Miami, you get into a groove of live, die, repeat, and eventually you'll be Tom Cruising the hell out of encounters.
We have to go. This dropship is about to explode.
While I'm certain it's possible to get through the game without skipping a single checkpoint, particularly if you're better at finding secrets than I was, you'll want to have as much spare blood metal on hand as you can get, because the weapons in the game are very cool and the upgrades make a huge difference to their power. I was only able to get one loadout fully upgraded during my run, and at this time there does not seem to be a New Game Plus mode, so fresh runs will be required for new builds. Luckily, the base power level of weapons is at least reasonable, so you can still do a fair bit of experimentation, but it would be cool if at some point New Game Plus were implemented, so you'd be encouraged to keep playing the campaign until you have every single weapon maxed out. Whichever weapons you do choose, you will have 3 at your disposal at all times: a pistol, a long gun, and a melee weapon. The mechanical interplay between them is really cool and deeper than it seems at first, too. It works like this: your pistols have unlimited ammo but aren't as powerful as your long guns. Your long guns are reliant on your weapon energy, which is restored by doing damage with your melee weapon, and the melee weapons obviously have limited range. This means you'll have to be mixing it up between doing light damage with your pistol from a distance, fighting up close and personal with your melee weapon, then unleashing hell with your long gun when you have enough ammo saved up. You also have the ability to block or parry, which admittedly I was constantly forgetting was an option, as the block uses a significant amount of your weapon energy, and the parry timing was very tight. Or the parry timing was quite tight. I can't decide which of those sentences sounds better, so we're doing them both.
We'll do it live!
It might be because I had just finished Blasphemous before I started Valfaris, but I probably would have traded the block in for a dodge roll with some invincibility frames, if given the option. When I stopped hitting B out of reflex, I did find that the challenge in Valfaris was pretty close to perfect. It is a very demanding game, but as I originally touched on in my Sekiro video, it's the good kind of demanding, where you feel like you're learning with every death. In the description, I'll link to the VOD of my fight against the final boss, in which I probably died 500 billion times. You can see and hear in real time as I learn the patterns, figure out the attacks, and adapt my strategy to the point that I make the first phase a joke, fairly consistently get through the second phase, and eventually finish the final phase. Spoiler alert, there are 3 phases. Special thanks to the folks who stuck around during that stream, as it was certainly a war of attrition, but...
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
The music and sound do a lot for the atmosphere. The soundtrack is all intense industrial metal, and like most indie games releasing these days, there's an option to buy the soundtrack as well, at least on GOG where I played. The sound effects are also very punchy and add impact to many of the weapons. In addition to GOG, the game can also be found on Steam, Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. The visual style is also really cool. It uses 3D models and filters to simulate a pixel art look, so it's not quite as pure retro from a technical standpoint as Blasphemous, but Steel Mantis used this to great effect by adding all sorts of cool colored lighting, particle effects, and camera zooms. It's as sexy and stylish as a sci-fi Cara Delevingne. That movie wasn't fantastic, but I mean, she's pretty. Fine, Dane DeHaan, you are too, but I still haven't forgiven you for Amazing Spider-Man 2. If you absolutely hate 2D shooter platformers, Valfaris probably won't be the game to turn you around on them, but if you have any fondness for Contra or Metal Slug, or are willing to try a genre which is a little out of your comfort zone, crank that volume and fire up Valfaris. Also, quick tip, if you're going to try headbanging while you play, move the chair back a bit. Gaming monitors are expensive. On a totally unrelated note, check out my Patreon.